In this video, I want to talk about the idea of growth charts and how they're used in order to understand and to track and measure a child's growth, but why there are some concerns or problems or trouble with these and what kind of reactions that cause in our families and the parents that we're working with. So we can all think about the child turns a certain age, they have their routine checkup, parents take them to the doctor, and they're going to measure certain aspects of their growth and plot them on these really confusing, a little bit hard to understand charts called growth charts. They'll usually take a look at height and weight and head circumference, and they're plotting these different points at the different checkups that happen. So this is what they look like. This is the CDC's recommended growth chart, actually borrowed from the World Health Organization. This is for birth to 24 months for boys, looking at the comparison between length and weight. It's considered length from birth to 24 months because they're laying down usually, and then it changes to height, but it's the same thing. And then this is the same one for girls for birth to 24 months. Notice the blue and pink. And all of these lines on here, what they mean and correspond to are different percentiles. And we hear percentiles a lot. So it starts down here at the bottom percentile, and there's all these lines up to the top percentile. These percentile lines include 5th, 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, 90th, and 95th percentile. So to understand what that means, because a lot of times we talk about percentages versus percentiles, and they're very confusing because they're not the same thing. A lot of times we are driven by a test-based mentality in society of percentages. So if you get a 90% on your test, that means that you had 90% correct, 10% incorrect. So we often think that 100% is the goal. When we're talking about percentiles, it's very different. With percentiles, if a child's weight is at the 50th percentile for her age, that means out of 100 normal children her same age, what does normal mean here? There's a good question there. This is coming directly from the CDC's website and an explanation of growth charts. But that means out of 100 normal children her age, 50 of them will be heavier than she is, and 50 will be lighter. 50 will weigh more than her, and 50 children will weigh less than her for her age. Okay? Another thing they don't explain about these percentiles to parents is that any number between the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile is considered normal. Again, what does normal mean here? What does this have? But a very common question that is searched for in search engines or asked to pediatricians or to other medical professionals is this percentile normal? Because parents want to know, and they're concerned about their children, and they're comparing their children to other children the same age. Now, let's talk about how these growth charts were developed. The first national growth charts were produced in 1977 by the CDC, and they were looking at and comparing height, weight, and head circumference for children. Now, I put national here in quotation marks because if it were truly representative of the nation, then the sample size wouldn't be limited to infants who were formula-fed, white, middle class from Ohio. You can see the concern with the representation of these data sets for these tests. These was in 1977, and they were starting to implement them in doctors' offices, commonly used. And it wasn't until 2000 that the CDC revised these charts to include more nationally representative information, including a variety of different ethnic groups, cultural representations, and locations around the country. But then in 2006, the World Health Organization released its own version focusing on specifically infants from 0 to 24 months who were growing under optimal conditions. And what this means is that these were breastfed infants from a smoke-free, drug-free home with little to no experiences of trauma in these early years. So, because there was discussion and professional opinion shared and decisions around recommendations for pediatricians, in 2010, the CDC then recommended that pediatricians start using the World Health Organization charts for children from 0 to 2, and then switch over to the CDC charts after 2 years old. So you can see there's a lot of confusion going on here. So first of all, what charts are your doctor using? Do you know? Do they know? Are they updated? You can also see the delay and how things are pushed out and how long it takes for things to change, and what that really measures and represents. So the other thing we have to think about are the parents. And the parents' perception of these charts, first of all, are usually pretty anxiety producing, because there's always this comparison going on. And then what do these percentiles mean can also be very confusing, especially if they're not explained in a very simplified, easy to understand terminology to make sure all parents know what it actually is measuring or what it does represent. There's actually been some studies done to try to understand how well parents know what growth charts means. And while in these studies, almost all parents have heard and have seen their child's growth chart, a lot of them don't know how to correctly explain what that means. And again, that's a confusion about the percentage versus the percentile, and how does that differ, and what does that mean for their child's growth? A lot of parents think that the percentile level that their child falls at is destiny. And if my child's in the 25th percentile, they're just bound to stay in the 25th percentile. Or if my child jumps up to the next percentile, that's good. And if my child drops down to the next lower percentile, that's bad. And what does this mean? Is my child growing better than your child? Does my child need to be higher? What does this mean? There's a lot of confusion with this. And really, there's nothing inherently good or bad or normal or not normal about any one number. It's a data point. It is not indicative of health. It is not indicative of overall profile of this child's, health measures, weight, everything like this that's going in. It's just a data point. But we tend to obsess over that because we think about numbers. So let me give you an example. Let's say a parent takes in their 3-month-old child, and at that time for weight, they're at the 50th percentile. And then they take in their child at their 4-month checkup, and they're at the 25th percentile now. Now, what does this mean? My child dropped from the 50th percentile to the 25th percentile. Is this bad? Do I need to now supplement and give my child additional high-calorie formula for them to then grow back up to the 50th percentile? It's never well explained. And that's why this causes a lot of anxiety for parents. This is a data point. And what we see that especially over a longer term, there's going to be a trend of growth because children grow, but in any given points, they might go up and down, up and down, up and down. And just because it's falling down doesn't mean that that's bad. Let me talk about that a little bit more. Here we see a growth chart. Let me make it bigger. And we have these points here. So these are measuring the different ages of when this child was measured and what those height up here and weight down here data points were at. So you could see here that this child at this age was at the top, so the 95th percentile, dropped down to the 90th percentile at this line, the second line right here, and then is moving a little bit closer and more towards the 75th percentile here. Dropped that line, actually went below and went below that here to just below the 50th percentile at this age. So technically speaking, this child has dropped 3 or more percentile lines over this age range of data points. Now, there is a medical terminology for this, and that is called failure to thrive. If a child falls below 3 of these percentile lines on their growth chart, technically they are showing failure to thrive. If we go back and look at this growth chart, the child is just under the 50th percentile. Are they thriving? Seems like it, and this is just a data point. However, sometimes this data point in itself can lead to this diagnosis, which is almost always detrimental to parents to hear that their baby is not thriving. Failure to thrive immediately gets internalized as I have failed as a parent. This is one of the worst terminologies of diagnostics that I believe exists because it's so negatively charged. And it can be so damaging for parents to think about what this means and implies for their child. If the child is losing weight, we need to know the full picture of that. Is a child growth also decreasing at the same rate? Is this child still within a healthy weight for their age, for their height? There's so many pieces of the picture that need to be considered, not just single data points on a chart. All children grow at different rates, and some children are going to be a little bit quicker to move and be mobile, of crawling and then walking and then running, and that physical action is going to then be reflected in how their body has absorbed some of that baby fat that they have. Or some children are shoot right up and some are a little bit slower. Every child grows at different rates, and we need to understand that. This is not a comparison of how fast do I need to grow to meet some number? What is that? This is a tool to track growth history that is supportive for doctors to understand what is the history of this child's growth. It's never intended to grade a child's health. And we also need to think that if you think about, let's say, a group of 23-year-olds, they're not all going to be the same height, they're not all going to be the same weight, and there are those that are going to be relatively short compared to their same age peers and then adults for their entire life. There are those going to be taller than others. There are those that are going to be very slender compared to others, and those are going to be more heavier than others. There's this average range, and again, going back to the 5th to 95th percentile is average. That needs to be more openly shared and understood for parents coming from doctors and professionals, so that there's not a lot of anxiety and stress related to this. The amount of body fat and muscle and bone change with age and differ between boys and girls. And also can differ because of other factors like what types of food we're consuming. What are some of our different cultural or ethnic backgrounds? where is our location of where we're being raised can all have impacts on our growth. If there's a significant change in one and not the other, a significant change in weight, of extreme weight increase or decrease and not height, that could be something to look at. If it's not representative of both height and weight together, it's just a data point that's going to be part of the picture that a medical professional is going to use to better understand this child's display of health. There could also be changes in growth with other symptoms that might indicate a health concern, but again, it's one data point with other information. How that's all taken into consideration is really the role of that medical professional to think about the full picture. So, how can we help support parents to take away the stress and worry and go back to focusing on the child and not the numbers? Let's take a look at your child. Is your child having positive experiences around food? Is your child, growing at his or her own rate? Can we involve the dietitian and nutritionist as well as the pediatrician and the whole medical team to all be on the same page so that we are supporting the child and their family in their development? Okay, so that was all for the thinking about growth charts and a little bit about the trouble with growth charts in this video. And please share this information, make it as easily to understand as possible for us so we can help parents and children. Thank you. Bye-bye.